It's not really a decision about the rights of women, it's a decision about the rights of doctors. Because doctors were the only ones who faced prosecution for performing an illegal abortion. And it's really a case about the right of doctors to practice medicine as they saw fit on behalf of their patients without risking criminal prosecution.
With the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the fast-track nomination process going on with Amy Coney Barrett, who is adamantly opposed to abortion rights in general, a new light is shining on the fragility of women's basic rights in the first place, even 50 years after Roe v. Wade has already been decided. To understand a little bit better about what Roe v. Wade really meant in the 70s and how it even came to be, all the things that have been going on for 50 years, and now a true threat to the law itself, we have Marilyn Hunter, who is a longtime teacher, union activist, and author of the Encyclopedia of the American Left's article on abortion and reproductive rights. We have Marilyn Hunter. Hey, Marilyn.
Hey, Nick. Nice to be here.
Why don't you start off with giving us a little background on how Roe v. Wade even came into being and what it meant back then in the 70s?
I think that's a good idea. One of the things we have to remember is that for the first 100 years of this country, abortion was legal. It was criminalized in the interest of the medical profession in the late 1800s. And decisions about women's health were nominally put in the hands of doctors. We know, of course, though, that women and their community, other women, midwives, etc., have always sought to control their own reproductive lives because that control really is a control over their entire life course. In the 40s and 50s, as the criminalization of abortion became so dire that hospitals were, number one, having wards for white middle-class women who were having legal abortions under their doctor's care, but entire septic abortion wards in hospital where people were suffering from abortions that hadn't been done in the safest conditions. It became necessary in the eyes of the medical profession who wanted to protect themselves, and also those middle-class women who in many cases were being denied their own right to control their own bodies. At the same time, there were young women in the second wave of the feminist movement, young women who had come out of the civil rights and the anti-war movement and the social movements of the time, who were fighting to establish their own health clinics, had networks of providing abortions for women, teaching women to give other women abortions. So there was kind of two threads in this movement. One, which was firmly in the hands of large, professional, white, middle class women. And of course, the doctors were still at that time mostly men. And there was this grassroots movement that had, out of the 60s, an idea that all of society could change and women could achieve what we called back in the day women's liberation. As this process began in the States in the late 60s, and because of certain court decisions that were made, the framework of this decision put it on a line to be decided in terms of a woman's privacy. Not a woman's rights, not a woman's right to control herself, but privacy rights under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. A woman, and so what Roe v. Wade established was, in the first larger portion of the gestation period, a woman had a right to an abortion in consultation with her doctor. The folks who had fought, the women and men too, and because there were a lot of men, especially a few male doctors that were very advanced in this, identified very early on that this was going to establish a right to abortion for some women, but was going to make abortion inaccessible for poor women, for women who did not have regular relationship with an established medical profession, and for women especially who were, because of the white supremacy in this country, were kind of reflected in the societal mind as loose, uncontrollable. You'll remember the old myth about welfare mothers, etc. That period of time came about, and the right, like I say, the right was established for some women, but not for most women.
So did that, I mean, that seems like it's kind of opening the door from the 1970s. So there could even be immediate attacks and undermining this right to privacy. And we've also seen a lot of state by state attacks. Can you
Yes, right.
can you give us like a background on all of the different ways that it's been attacked in different places and different times?
Well, I think you're right, and just as I said that the movement to decriminalize began in the states. Those forces, the forces of the right wing, which had begun organizing in the 1960s to put women back into the kitchen and into the control of the male head of a family, those forces were already organizing. And so once this was established as a privacy right with the limits within the limits of due process, which means you can make a law, it just has to be made fairly. They began a legal assault on these rights, which we've seen over the last 50 years has ended up in states with only one abortion clinic in an entire state, states, doctors that can't do abortions because of some limitations on their practice. And we've also seen that it has resulted in hundreds, probably thousands, of harassment and terror and arsons and 6 murders. So this has been a very violent as well as a legal movement to turn back women's rights. At the same time, in fact, when Roe v. Wade was passed, we all saw it as a real victory and a step forward. There were forces, however, who knew that the framework of its decision was going to make it harder to take it fully through to the establishment of women's true rights over their own reproduction and what came to be called reproductive justice. But in the 70s and 80s, as the African American movement, the movement among Asians, indigenous peoples, Chicanos, Latinx, began to move to serve their communities, these questions of what women needed to have the real choice to have a child began to grow. And we saw that culminate in the 1990s with the establishment, under the leadership mostly of women of color and poor women, of a right to what is called reproductive justice. And I don't know if you've heard about that, but I'd love to explain to you their vision, because I think their vision is the vision that is going to take us forward.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question is not only has the struggle changed over the last 50 years and maybe, where can that lead us today and moving forward? And if that is a fight for reproductive justice as a broad term instead of just the right to an abortion for those who can afford it and so on, where is that struggle right now, even with or without a new Supreme Court justice?
Well, I think that as so many struggles that we're seeing today, the struggle for healthcare, the struggle for education and quality education for all of these struggles are kind of at the starting gates in a new push for a society that's much more just. And when you think about the framework of reproductive justice, what these women are saying to us is, my decision to have a child is not a decision that I simply make about the 9 months of gestation. But am I going to have a child who is not going to be able to walk outside his house safely? Am I going to have a child and not have job or work or support where I can feed that child? Is that child going to be threatened by being killed by police when they go around the corner? Will that child have education? Is the future of that child incarceration? So you can start to see that the choices we're making about motherhood and parenthood and women's rights to control their bodies is about all of our rights to control our futures in the interest of the younger generation coming up. And that means in the interest of the entire community, not just a medical profession and of course, we even know that today the medical profession, what we're talking about in compared even to the middle of the 20th century, we're talking about a giant megapolis corporation that is making money off of us in medicine. So this is really a movement that's very at the heart of our communities, at the heart of our lives as men and women who are parents, but is also a movement that in general challenges the very foundations upon which our society has been based for the last several hundred years. So the movement for reproductive rights, one of its signature organizations is called Sister Song, based in Atlanta originally, and very much tied with the position of women in the South, because we know poor women and women of color have always received the worst treatment in our southern states. And all of this is, I think, shaping up to be a part of an overall fight to decide what our future is going to look like.
Wow, that's pretty heavy. Thanks a lot. I feel like I know a lot more about what's going on. Thanks a lot, Marilyn.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm glad to be able to answer a couple of your questions, Nick. Thanks a lot.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you.